The call came at 11:58 on a Tuesday night. 2 days after my father's funeral and 4 hours before, I was scheduled to sit down with my siblings and sign documents that would have ended my connection to everything my father spent his life building. The number on my screen was one I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was exhausted in the specific way you are exhausted after 3 days of grief and logistics and performing, composed in front of people who need you to be composed. I was in bed. The lights were off. My wife was asleep beside me. I answered, because something made me answer. The voice on the other end was an older man, careful, deliberate, the kind of voice that chooses words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. He said, "Is this Thomas Garrett?" I said, "It is." He said, "My name is Walter Briggs. I was your father's attorney for 31 years. I need you to hear me clearly. Do not sign anything tomorrow. What they are showing you is not the real one." I sat up in the dark and said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Who are you again?" He said, "I have been your father's personal attorney since 1993, not the family attorney, his attorney, private, separate." He paused. "Your father came to me 6 weeks before he died. He told me what he believed was going to happen after he was gone. He told me to wait until the night before the signing and then to call you. Only you." I said, "What is in the real will?" He said, "Everything you were told was taken from you." I said, "I will be at your office first thing in the morning." He said, "I am expecting you." My name is Thomas Garrett. I am 44 years old. I am a civil engineer. I've spent my career designing infrastructure, bridges, water treatment systems, highway interchanges, things that have to hold weight. Things where if you get the calculation wrong, people get hurt. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. My father was Robert Garrett. He was 68 years old when he died of pancreatic cancer. On a March morning that was colder than March had any right to be. He had been diagnosed 14 months earlier, and he had spent those 14 months doing what he always did, which was working. He had built Garrett Construction over 40 years, starting with a residential contracting business. He ran out of a truck in 1981 and expanding over 4 decades into a commercial construction firm with contracts across 5 states and a reputation that was earned deal by deal and never once compromised. My father was not a complicated man in the ways that matter. He was honest. He was precise. He did what he said he was going to do. He built things that lasted. I am his youngest child. I have 2 older siblings. My brother Daniel is 51 years old. He joined the company at 22 and has been in the executive structure for nearly 30 years. My sister Carolyn is 48. She married a man named Philip Stokes, is a financial advisor, and who has been adjacent to the family business in various consulting capacities for as long as I can remember. I went a different direction. I studied engineering. I built my own career outside the company. My father respected that. He told me once that he was proud of me for doing something on my own terms, and that the company would always be there if I ever wanted to be part of it. That conversation happened 8 years ago on a Sunday afternoon on his back porch in Knoxville while we watched his 2 dogs sleep in the yard. I think about that conversation a lot now. The relationship between my siblings and me has never been hostile exactly. More like the relationship between people who have chosen different orbits around the same center and only really interact when the center requires it. Holidays, family events, the occasional phone call. We were not close. We were not enemies. We were adults who had grown up in the same house and then grown in different directions and maintained a cordial surface over whatever was underneath. When my father was diagnosed, everything shifted slightly. Daniel took on more formal authority at the company. Carolyn and Philip began spending more time at my father's house, managing things, they called it. I came when I could, which was less than I would have liked because I was in Denver and the demands of my own work were real. I have regret about that. I will carry that regret. What I did not know was that while I was managing my regret from a distance, Daniel and Carolyn and Philip were having conversations with my father that I was not part of. Or more accurately, conversations they were having around my father, who in the final months of his illness was not always as present as they were counting on people to assume. I found out the details later. I am going to tell them to you in order. Walter Briggs had an office on Gay Street in downtown Knoxville in a building that had been there since 1962 and had the specific quality of permanence that comes from never having tried to look modern. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk that had seen 30 years of other people's most difficult moments. Walter himself was 72 years old, with white hair and the unhurried manner of someone who has long since stopped being impressed by urgency because he understands that real urgency requires patience, not speed. He shook my hand and sat across from me and placed a folder on the desk between us and said, "Before I show you this, I want to tell you something about your father." I nodded. "Robert Garrett came to me in February," he said. 6 weeks before he died, he came alone. He did not tell your brother or your sister he was coming. He sat in that same chair you were sitting in, and he told me that he had concerns about the direction of certain estate planning documents that had been prepared by the firm your family has been using for the last decade. He paused, said he had signed documents in that period that he was not certain he had read carefully enough. The people had presented things to him during times when his medication affected his clarity, and that he had concerns about what those documents actually said. He looked at me steadily. "Your father was a careful man, Thomas. He built a 40-year business on precision. The fact that he was uncertain about what he had signed should tell you something about the circumstances under which he signed it." I said, "What did he want you to do?" "He wanted me to prepare a new will, clean, unambiguous, reflecting his actual intentions for his estate, which were not what the documents your siblings have been preparing to execute actually say." He opened the folder. Walter laid out the situation in 45 minutes with the methodical precision of a man who had been doing this for 50 years and understood that clarity was more useful than drama. The family had been using an estate planning firm called Merritt and Associates for 11 years. The lead attorney at Merritt was a man named Gary Odom, who had been handling the Garrett family estate documents during the entire period of my father's illness. During that period, several documents had been executed: revised trust structure, updated beneficiary designations, most significantly a new will dated 14 months prior. 2 weeks after my father's diagnosis, that will, as Walter showed me in summary, left controlling interest in Garrett Construction to Daniel and Caroline jointly, provided for a cash settlement to me of $250,000. It restructured the family real estate holdings into a trust controlled by Daniel, with Carolyn and Philip as co-trustees. What it did not include was anything resembling what my father had told Walter 6 weeks before his death that he had intended. Walter placed a second document on the desk. "Your father's actual will," he said, "signed in my presence, witnessed, notarized, dated 6 weeks ago." I looked at the date, looked at the signature, my father's handwriting, which I had known my entire life. "This will," Walter said, "leaves you an equal 1/3 interest in Garrett Construction." "An equal 1/3 interest in the real estate trust?" "In co-trustee authority alongside your brother and sister." He paused. "Also includes a letter." He placed an envelope on top of the folder. He said, "Your father wrote it himself." "In this office." At that desk?" "He asked me to give it to you when you came." I looked at the envelope. My name on it. Robert Garrett's handwriting. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Then I put it in my jacket pocket. I said, "I will read it later." Walter nodded. He understood. I said, "What happens now?" He said, "Now we file the authentic will with the probate court, and we challenge the prior document." He said, "I've already been in contact with a probate litigation attorney named Susan Park, who handles exactly this category of case. She is expecting your call." He looked at me. "Thomas, I want to be honest with you about what you were walking into. Challenging an estate document that has been prepared by a family firm and signed during a period of illness is not simple. Your brother and sister are going to say your father had full capacity when he signed the earlier will. Gary Odom is going to say the same thing. You are going to need to demonstrate that either the document itself is invalid or that it does not represent your father's genuine intent." He paused. "What works in your favor is this. Your father came to me. He initiated this. He was coherent and specific, and he knew exactly what he was doing. I have 31 years of professional relationship with him and a reputation in This city that I have never once compromised. I said, that helps. He said, it helps considerably. I called Susan Park from the parking lot. She was in her early 50s and had a voice that suggested she had heard every version of every family estate dispute that existed and was no longer surprised by any of them. She said, come to my office at 2 o'clock. Bring everything Walter gave you. I will have some things to show you as well. Susan's office was in a building on Cumberland Avenue. It was newer than Walter's and considerably less atmospheric, but organized with the specific efficiency of someone. Litigation and cannot afford unnecessary friction. She had a conference table covered in documents when I arrived. She had been busy since Walter called her the previous evening. As she said, I want to start with Gary Odom. I looked at the documents in front of her. Gary Odom had been licensed to practice in Tennessee for 22 years. He had a clean record with the state bar. He had handled estate matters for a number of prominent Knoxville families. He also had a financial relationship with Philip Stokes that had not been disclosed. To my father, Susan placed a document in front of me. This is a referral agreement between Odom's firm and Stokes Financial Advisors, your brother-in-law's company. Philip Stokes had been referring estate clients to Odom for 6 years. In return, Odom referred financial management work to Stokes, a reciprocal arrangement. Disclosed it to the Garrett family. She looked at me. This matters because it establishes that Gary Odom had a financial interest in maintaining a relationship with Philip Stokes. And Philip Stokes had a direct financial interest in the structure of your father's estate documents. She paused. An attorney who drafts estate documents while having an undisclosed financial relationship with the beneficiaries. Spouse has a conflict of interest significant enough to call the validity of those documents into serious question. I looked at the referral agreement. The dates on it went back 6 years. My father had been Odom's client for 11 years. I said, how did you find this? She said, I have a very good investigator and a lot of experience knowing what to look for. Then she placed a second document on the table. The will dated 14 months ago. The one my siblings were planning to execute tomorrow. She had flagged 3 sections. Look at the language here, she said, and here, and particularly here. I looked. The language in those 3 sections was noticeably different from the surrounding text. Not dramatically, subtly, the kind of difference that would not be obvious to a grieving family reviewing a document they expected to be straightforward, but obvious to someone who had spent 20 years reading estate documents with the specific attention of someone looking for exactly this. She said, I sent this to a forensic document examiner this morning. I want an independent assessment of whether these sections were part of the original document or were inserted during the revision process. Said 48 hours, if I asked correctly. She looked at me. Thomas, I want to be honest with you the same way Walter was. This is not a simple case. Your brother and sister are going to retain counsel, and they're going to fight this. Daniel has been running this company for 30 years, and he is not going to accept a challenge to his authority over it without a significant legal response. She paused. But I have the authentic will signed by a man of demonstrated capacity. 6 weeks before his death, in the presence of an attorney with an impeccable 30-year reputation. I have an undisclosed conflict of interest that undermines the validity of the prior documents. And I have forensic analysis that may establish that those documents were altered after execution. She said, what I need from you is this. Anything today? Do not communicate with Daniel or Caroline about this conversation. Do not give them any indication that you are aware of the authentic will. And do not go to that signing meeting this afternoon. I said, what do I tell them when? I do not show up. She thought for a moment. Then she said, tell them you are not feeling well. Tell them the grief is heavier than you expected, and you need another day. Tell them the truth, in other words. The grief is real. The rest we will handle. I drove back to my hotel. I sat in the room for a while. Then I took the envelope out of my jacket pocket, my father's handwriting on the front. Thomas. I opened it. The letter was 2 pages written in his hand. Not typed, written. I am going to keep most of what he said between him and me, because some things belong to the person they were written for, and not to anyone else. What I will tell you is this. He knew what had been done. He'd understood. It gradually, over the final months of his illness, as the medication cleared between doses and he had looked at things with the clarity he could not always maintain, and had seen the shape of what was happening around him. He wrote that he was sorry he had not caught it sooner, that he had trusted people he should have examined more carefully, that he had let his illness make him dependent in ways that had been used against him. He wrote that he had always intended the company to be shared equally among his 3 children, and that this had been his intention since the day I was born and had never changed. He wrote that he was proud of what I had built on my own, that he understood why I had chosen a different path, that he had never interpreted my independence as indifference, and he hoped I had never interpreted his silence about the company as exclusion. He wrote that he was leaving it in my hands to make this right, that he believed I was the one of his children most likely to do what needed to be done in the way it needed to be done, carefully, precisely. The way you build something that has to hold weight. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I sat in the hotel room in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'd grown up, and looked out the window at the city and thought about my father sitting at Walter Briggs's desk writing that letter 6 weeks before he died, making sure I would get it. I called Susan Park and told her I was ready. The forensic document examiner completed her analysis in 36 hours. Her findings were specific and documented. 2 sections of the will dated 14 months prior contained language that had been inserted after the original document was prepared. The font metrics were consistent across the document, but the character spacing in 2 paragraphs was statistically inconsistent with the rest of the text in ways that indicated those sections had been produced at a different time and composited into the document electronically before printing. She could not say with certainty who had done it. She could say with certainty that it had been done. Susan filed the challenge in Knox County Probate Court on a Thursday morning. She filed the authentic will simultaneously. She filed a complaint against Gary Odom with the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility, citing the undisclosed referral relationship. She filed a motion to freeze all estate transactions pending resolution of the challenge. The freeze was granted within 4 hours. Daniel called me that afternoon. His voice had a quality I had not heard from him before. Something that was trying to be calm and was not quite getting there. "Thomas, what is this?" I said, "It is a legal filing, Daniel. I think you should call your attorney." He said, "You cannot do this. The will is valid." I said, "There are 2 wills. Of them is authentic. The court will determine which one." He said, "Dad signed that document." I said, "Dad signed both of them. The question is which one reflects what he actually intended." It was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This is going to destroy the family." I said, "Daniel, I want to be clear about something. I am not doing this to destroy anything. I am doing this because our father came to an attorney 6 weeks before he died and told him what he actually wanted. Okay. That is what I am trying to honor. Whatever happens in court, I am trying to make sure his wishes are carried out, not yours, not Carolyn's, not Philip's, his." Another silence. Then he hung up. The probate proceedings took 11 months. I am not going to walk you through every motion and counter-motion, because some of it was genuinely tedious, and the relevant parts are what matter. Gary Odom surrendered his license to practice law in Tennessee for months into the proceedings as part of a negotiated resolution with the state bar. The surrender followed the public filing of the referral agreement and 3 additional matters that Susan's investigator identified involving other clients of Odom's firm. Philip Stokes lost 2 significant institutional clients who cited the conflict of interest disclosure in their termination letters. The forensic document examiner testified in a deposition that lasted 6 hours. Daniel's attorney cross-examined her for 4 of those hours and did not succeed in undermining her methodology or her conclusions. Caroline retained separate counsel from Daniel midway through the proceedings. Her attorney reached out to Susan. In month 8, with an indication that Caroline was prepared to discuss resolution, Susan said, "We are prepared to discuss resolution on the basis of the authentic will." Caroline's attorney went back and came back 10 days later. They accepted. Daniel held out for another 6 weeks. Then his attorney called Susan on a Tuesday morning and said his client was prepared to settle on the same terms. The authentic will was admitted to probate. The prior document was declared invalid on the grounds of attorney conflict of interest and material alteration. Garrett Construction is now structured as my father intended. Equal 1/3 interests. I did not take a formal role in the company. I have my own career, and it is the career I chose, and it is the right career for me. What I took was my seat at the table, a seat my father had always intended to be mine and had made sure I would have, even after he was gone. Daniel and I are not close. I do not expect that will change dramatically. What has changed is that we are honest with each other in a way we were not before. The pretense is gone. The surface is still civil, but it is a different kind of civil, the honest kind. Carolyn and I talk occasionally. She made choices she has not fully accounted for, and I have not fully forgiven. But she is my sister, and my father loved her, and those two things are enough for me to keep the door open. Philip Stokes is no longer involved in any aspect of the family estate or business. That door is closed. Walter Briggs retired 6 months after the proceedings concluded. I sent him a bottle of bourbon and a note that said thank you for the midnight call. He sent back a handwritten card that said your father was one of the finest men I knew in 50 years of this work. Make sure the things he built hold weight. I have that card in my desk. I read it sometimes when I need to remember what precision is actually for. My father's letter is in the same drawer. I've read it many times. I have memorized parts of it. The part I come back to most is near the end. He wrote that he had spent 40 years building things, that the buildings and the roads and the bridges were not the point. The point was that the people who came after him would have something solid to stand on. That is what he was trying to give me, not the company, not the money. Something solid to stand on. I think about that when I'm working. When I am calculating loads and tolerances and the specific margins of safety that keep structures from failing under pressure, my father understood engineering better than he knew. He understood that the most important calculation is not what something can hold on a good day, but what it holds when the conditions turn against you. He built accordingly. He made sure I would too. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. And tell me if you have ever had someone call you at midnight to tell you the truth that everyone else was counting on you not to know. I read every single one. Like this video if you believe that the truth always leaves a paper trail for the person who is patient enough to follow it. And subscribe because next week I have a story that is going to hit just as hard as this one. I will see you there.